Welcome back, guys, to our second video regarding Python programming. Now today we're going to be talking about variables and data types, which are very essential before you even start typing any sort of code. So you've probably heard of variables if you've taken any form of a math class. Variables are essentially placeholders for values. They're sort of symbolic representations of a value. Now, if that doesn't make any sense, I created this visual representation using the bucket analogy to sort of illustrate my point. Now, pay attention because it goes by pretty quick. So, breaking down what's happening here, when you declare a variable, what happens is that your computer locates a piece of its memory to store that variable. You give it a name, and finally you assign it a value. And that value you can manipulate however you want. So, kind of writing out what's happening, to create a variable, what you have to first do is declare it with a name. So declare the name, and then you have to next assign it a value. So let's take the bucket example. If you notice the sticky note on it, I named my variable marker bucket. Also, on a side note, when it comes to naming variables, you always make the first letter lowercase and every consecutive word attached to it as uppercase, and there's no space. These are all one word, so make sure you remember that. This is called camel case writing. Back to the topic. So I declared a variable marker bucket, and I put 3 markers inside. So now whenever I refer to the word marker bucket in my code, the computer will interpret and understand that I'm referring to the value 3. Also, this equal sign. In code, a single equal sign does not mean the same thing as it does in math. In terms of programming, an equal sign is known as the assignment operator. And what that basically means is that whatever value is on the right side, it's going to assign it to the left. So over here, I have idle open just to do a quick demonstration of what it would look like in actual code. So first, of course, I declare my variable with the name, marker bucket, using that camel case naming convention. I assign it a value of 3, and that's pretty much it. We've created a variable named marker bucket, and it's holding an integer value, meaning whole numbers, positive or negative. That's one of the data types we're going to talk about. So now if I ever refer to marker bucket, or if I, such as printing out what value it is, the computer recognizes that it has a value of 3. Using a name sort of creates a symbolic representation that makes sense to the user and the programmer, because the number 3 by itself probably makes no sense. But when you assign it to a variable named marker bucket, you can sort of make sense that you're probably referring to the amount of markers inside the bucket. Now, you can always manipulate values inside it. So say I did marker bucket equals marker bucket plus 1. So like I said, so this is the assignment operator. We are basically reassigning a value to marker bucket here. So what we're doing is we're taking the current value marker bucket, which the computer recognizes as 3, and we're adding 1 to it. So now our new value reassigned to marker bucket will be 4. So if I ever refer to marker bucket again, it should recognize that it is 4. So let's try it out in idle. And if I print it out, boom, 4. And for you visual learners out there, here we're going to refer back to the bucket analogy.
Kobe.
So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of variables. I don't want to keep rambling on about it because I think it'll make more and more sense as we do examples in the future. Now, data type. The ones I'm going to talk about today are known as the primitive types, because technically you can make your own custom data type later when we talk about objects and more complicated stuff. But these are the data types you're going to deal with most often. Now, I like to point out that I mentioned that when you create a variable in Python, you just give it a name and then assign a value to it. Normally, in most other programming languages like Java, you have to actually declare the data type and then the name before you assign it a value. So in this case, when I put the int before it, I'm saying the integer, the variable will be an integer, and it can only hold integers. If I try to assign text to it or whatnot, it will crash. Now, Python, that is what's referred to as statically typed, but Python is a dynamically typed language. So if I have an integer assigned to markup bucket one time, and then the next moment I reassign it and give it the text value of, let's just say, the text representation of actually the word 3, and then I try to print marker bucket, it doesn't throw an error and it just says 3. So you won't have the issue with Python, but as general practice, in case you ever move on to other more advanced programming languages, always try to keep whatever data type you started with, try to only use that variable with that data type. Now, I've been talking about data types a lot. We're only going to talk about 3 of the most important ones, and that is string, integer, and float. Now, to put things in a simpler way, a string, the reason we call it string, is actually a string of characters, which is just a fancy way of saying text, pretty much. Now, integers are basically whole numbers, and it could be positive or negative. And float, the float, again, like string, it just means floating point value, and that, in other words, that floating point is actually the decimal point. So we're referring to decimal numbers usually. So some examples now would be, like I said earlier, 3. Now, strings will always be surrounded in quotes. This could be double quotes or single quotes. Python does not care. Next thing is integers, we could just have 3, and then float, we could say 3.14. And yeah, those are pretty much it. Oh, and I didn't mention this earlier, but also there are certain characters that you cannot use. There's certain characters that you cannot use when making a variable because it will confuse the computer. For example, we cannot use the word just str. You notice it highlighted into purple. Or we can't use the word int. We can't use the word capitalized true. We can't start off with a dot operator. You notice it shows an invalid syntax. That's because these are what are known as reserved words in Python, or any programming language for that matter. And that's because these are words that already have meaning within our interpreter. So if we use them, it kind of confuses the interpreter, and it kind of just throws a bunch of errors. So yeah, that's pretty much it, really. We talked about variables today, and pretty much 3 of the most basic data types. It's nothing too complicated, and yeah. So thank you guys for watching this video. Next time, or I was gonna say next week, I don't know if it'll be next week, we're gonna actually hopefully open up PyCharm and kind of mess around with variables, maybe make a basic calculator to kind of start your first program. So yeah, looking forward to it. See you guys.